Right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. As I see people arriving, great if you could have your cameras on, please, so we could have a bit more interaction with you. That'd be super. We've muted your microphones upon arrival, people. Not that we don't want to hear from you, it's just that we don't want to hear from you just yet. Okay, so just wait for a few more people to land. There we have it. Great stuff. So we've got people from all over the place, just recognizing a few names and a few people from the UK and beyond. The joy of video conferencing. Oh, super. Okay. Right. Well, this afternoon is one of our conversations with the mediator. So this is one of the things we're doing to celebrate our 25 years in business, which will be actually, I just noticed the date, on Sunday, the 19th of May. That will be exactly 25 years since I started this company. So one of the celebration events this year is having conversations with the mediator, and I'm delighted to have today with us George Andruszkiewicz. George is one of our panel mediators. Hi, George.
Hi there.
And we're going to be talking to George about his experiences in mediation and some stuff about how he works as a mediator. Towards the end, we will invite questions, and we'll invite you to put your hands up towards the end of this 45 minutes or so, if there's any questions or comments you have for George. If, as we go along, you think of something you'd like to say, pop it in the chat box, and we'll try and manage that towards the end so that we get as many of those in as possible. Okay, so first of all, George, would you like to introduce yourself, maybe a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yes. Hello. Hello, Mike. Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. Talk a bit about mediation, and but I didn't start off as one. I didn't plop out into the world of work as a mediator. I doubt very much of that sort of thing was available when I first started working. I think my background is more of a zigzag than a trajectory. You know, when people have a trajectory, they kind of know where they're going. They're quite clear on with their focus, and they're lucky, I think, because they just get on with it. People like myself, we tend to zigzag around, and then we eventually get the right sort of spot, and we learn from that. But we've also accumulated all sorts of knowledge, which we then apply into the world of mediation. That's one of the things I suppose I want to bring out in today's session.
Sure.
I never dreamt there would be mediation or that I would work in it. In my early 20s, I'd been to college. I started doing committee work for an organisation called NEDO, National Economic Development Office, which was what they called a quango in those days. It's a quasi-autonomous government office. So we provided a secretariat. It was in a building by the Thames, very nice part of London, and we were an impartial secretariat for trade unions, management, and government. And they would come together in our committee rooms, and we were there to provide them with sort of facilities to meet. We would take all the set the agendas, do the minutes, and we would be there. You know, it's particularly important to be impartial. So I'm kind of learning these skills early on in that sort of environment. Yeah, the trade unions always wanted to have a pre-meeting before their meeting with the management and government, so we would afford them that, and it would be private for them.
So did you come? Were there conflict situations that you had to address right back then, George?
Not at that point, although you could feel the simmerings of it. There were, I was quite a junior member, so I was unaware of all the various things that were going on. But, employment relations being what they are, industrial relations in those days, as there were no things were happening. And NEDO was an attempt to, let's work together. Let's work collaboratively for mutual benefit. The organisation itself, I think, on one meeting, they saved the country 1.2 billion just on something that someone suggested. So they no longer exist. But
what was your first move towards working more, sort of doing one-to-one work or supportive work, George? Where did that lead you?
Well, I then went into HR. I'm working for a FTSE 100 company in human resources. And there were things there where I was working with people that were perhaps had problems with the organisation or the way that things were being reorganised. So sitting down and working through with them. But again, it's sort of continuity of the work I'd been doing with NEDO, which was to do with management and trade unions. And again, this sort of attempt at impartiality, although obviously in HR, you're on the management side. But what it did give me exposure to was employment tribunals.
Okay.
And all that meant, where I think some of the cases were, it had to go to tribunal. Others, I thought to myself, this is daft. We're lawyering up, because we had a legal department, and I would be one of the people that advised them. And we would get a barrister and all the rest of it in front of a tribunal. And the trade union, who would be working on behalf of the employee, the staff member, would be lawyering up as well with their solicitor, and they would be coming in. And I was just thinking to myself, this is a waste of time and money. And we could have just sat down, those two people that are at loggerheads, usually a management and a report. They could have sat down and worked it through with a third party. Didn't know about mediation in those days. It wasn't available, but I tucked it away for later. I thought, well, this is an interesting one. How could it be done differently? So it sort of left me with that sense of potential, shall we say.
Okay.
Then I went to manage a team in further education college, and so tasted management, and then looking for new fields, new endeavours. I went into the mental health and addictions field.
Okay.
So complete change of tack. Trained in group psychotherapy, and was running groups, recovery groups for people, and dealing with all sorts of people, really wide range of people. There were journalists from the FT. There were business people. One guy turned up. He said he used to have a red Maserati and a blue Maserati, and back in the day, and now he just turned up with one bag. There were people from the army, squaddies who had PTSD and were using substances and so on. One of the things I learned from that was I'm working with people, ambivalence. People had ambivalence. They were hoping for a better life. If you work with ambivalence, there's a chance that they're open to other possibilities rather than just one route.
Okay. It'll be interesting to come back to that when we start to talk about your mediation work, actually, about ambivalence, the sense of, being in two minds, I guess, would be a very simple way of putting it. Having a tendency to do and a tendency to not do. Okay. So tell us how you got into, when you first got into mediation then, George.
On the back of the work with in the addictions field and the mental health field, because I was running a couple of multi-occupancy hospitals, and there were always problems going on. And I was the one that they pull me in to say, right, sort it out between these two or these three. And my wife had started. She was a clinical manager in an employee assistance program, so an EAP. And she said to me, "Oh, this mediation thing. I've been asked to set up a mediation service for the EAP." And she went and did some training, and she loved it. Absolutely enjoyed it. She said, "You'll be good at this." And I ignored her for a while. I ignored her for quite a long time. And eventually she said, "Look, there's this course. Go and do that." So I did, and I've never looked back. I got some work, kind of some unpaid work straight away to do mediation. But I thought I'll take that. And I can negotiate some time away from my full-time work to start doing it 3 days, 4 days a week instead of 5. And off we went. That was 9 years ago.
Great stuff.
And since then, I've tried to read as much as I can about mediation and talk to people as much as I can about it.
Sure thing. So we've that's brilliant. Thanks, George. We've got people on who are brand new mediators. From some names I recognise, we've got some people on who are more seasoned mediators. But tell us about your first experiences of dipping your toe into the mediation world. Your first couple of cases.
Oh, very memorable. I think they really come to the fore because you don't know quite what to expect. I mean, if you've done a course, then you've done the role play, which nobody really enjoys, but actually it's good stuff because it gets you ready for the real world. and the model I was trained in was it was two mediator model. So there were two of us turning up. There was one more experienced mediator, and there was one like myself, new off the block, as it were. And the idea was that I would learn from them, and they'd give me a go eventually. So I did a few mediations voluntarily with a number of mediators to get exposure.
Were they workplace? Were they workplace, George?
They were in the NHS and commercial organisations, big organisations that were paying for this, and it was an EAP that was providing a mediation service. The one that my wife had set up and moved on from. That was the organisation that was. And so the importance of getting the parties on board to begin with, the pre-mediation side. And it was scary, slightly scary. And I remember my first solo mediation. Then after that, you're again one of those ones that you remember quite well, because flying on your own, you think,
suddenly
there's no
co-pilot.
That's right. So I can kind of go into a corridor with and go, what do you do now? But that went okay as well. So I was pleased with that. Just having exposure to it, and then I got some voluntary work with a neighbourhood mediator. Well, actually, they were county based. They were Hertfordshire Mediation.
Oh, okay.
And so I was again. That's a 2 mediated model, and they showed me some extra things. I started doing conflict coaching with them as well, which was really, really good.
Okay.
It's another aspect which perhaps we can touch on.
Yeah, excellent. My own cut my mediation teeth doing community mediation as well, back in about 93, probably around about there, and trained in community mediation when I was actually at an FE college doing some teaching, and they trained some people up in community mediation there, and I thought, hey, this is good. But like yourself, with a sort of a therapy background, coming from psychotherapy beginnings, I could see how, as we've talked in the past, there's a lot from psychotherapy that can be brought into the encounter between two people who are in conflict. I don't doubt that when you were doing your group psychotherapy sessions with people with addictions, that there was probably conflict in those groups, but there's quite a lot that can be borrowed from the one field and brought into the other, isn't there?
Definitely, yeah. Things like acting out, which is a psychotherapy idea where people feel frustrated. They're frustrated in some way that they cannot say something to someone, so they'll act it out. They'll be passive aggressive, or they'll slam doors or whatever it might be to show that the displeasure. That's an obvious example of acting out. There are more subtle varieties. There's also the drama triangle, which you've got victim, persecutor, and rescuer. Being aware of that, as a mediator, not to step into that drama triangle, but to try and alleviate people's roles in that, and so they step into a much more positive role. And there's other projection. There's another one, which is a good one. What I think I know what you're about, so therefore you must be like that. And the other person's doing the same to you.
Believing you know what somebody else is thinking about you or about a third party.
And we can look at some cases where that's come across, and then people get that. Oh, not like that, are you? Oh, gosh.
I mean, something I realized early on in doing community mediation. I worked for a volunteer, same as yourself, for a community mediation service around the West Midlands in my case, and the cases would present as a dispute between two parties who lived next door to each other, which turned out to be two families that lived next door to each other. Quite often the extended families were involved, because people need to tell their conflict stories to as many people as possible. It seems like the more people you tell it to, the less worrisome it becomes. Until it was clear that a lot of the disputes that we were dealing with in this community mediation service were almost clan disputes, whole extended families and whole groups of people, sometimes defined by geography, which street you lived in, or which how you related to these particular families. So the context in which a dispute takes place is really important. And I think, as a lesson, and I imagine you have learned as well, even in workplace disputes that appear to be between two people, there's often other people around the outside who are having an influence on what's going on, either making the conflict worse, potentially making it better. But others have an investment in this dispute, not just the two people who are presenting in the mediation room.
Yeah, that's right. And some people are living that conflict vicariously, and they're quite upset by it. Two of my colleagues are in conflict. This is really upsetting because I don't want to show favoritism to either of them, or else there is favoritism, or else there are people who are intent on stirring it up. They actually enjoy this happening. It's something, a bit of spice in the workplace.
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes the conflict is more interesting than the work that you're being expected to do, so, and it's a kind of a disappointment. I think that's something that's unexplored, is the grief that people can experience when the conflict is over. It's like, oh, how did the mediation go? It went really, really well. We're fine now, and we're going to get on great. Oh, really? Yeah, so that's over. It's the end of an episode, end of a story, a narrative is concluded.
Yeah. Now we're going to have to stir something else somewhere else.
Let's find another one to whip up. Yeah. So just coming up to date a bit. So you've been mediating for us as an esteemed member of our panel for about 6 years, George. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So 9 years since I trained.
9 years since you trained. Talk about some of the things that we send you away these days.
Oh, well, without giving away any any personal details, obviously we keep things as confidential as possible. There are some themes, I think, which arise from various mediations. The one that has come up a few times is where you've got party A and party B. Party A is a manager, party B is a report. They've fallen out. It's usually party B, the reports, that has raised a grievance against their manager. And then we sit down in mediation and we talk it through. And obviously, as a mediator, I've learned over the years that my skill is in the questions that are asked.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, as a result of some questioning, and as a result of them pondering a little about what's going on, they realise that X has been involved in all of this. And that X has been stirring things up with B, the report. So that B brought a grievance against A, the manager. And then A couldn't go for that promotion, and X got that promotion instead. And they're now, a level above everyone else. And you think, oh, and they kind of looked at each other and they said, do you think that's what happened? And that's not the first time I've heard that.
Okay.
There have been other groups. There's been other work where with other organisations where that has come about as well. Okay.
Well, you realise there's a spectre in the room.
A spectre is a good word. Yes.
Somebody else in both parties' sort of psyche, as it were, maybe in the shadow a little bit.
That's right.
Realise is having such an influence on the situation. There's quite a few situations that I and our other mediators, as you know, we've got like 12 or 13 on the panel now, so very busy mediators. The situation gets presented to us as two parties, but again, a bit like I was saying with neighbourhoods and community disputes, you realise there are other characters in this drama. And we'll sometimes go back to referrers as openly as we can within the bounds of the confidentiality, and wonder whether certain other people need to be involved. There's often resistance to that because people will say, oh, it's not my fault, I'm not to blame for what's going wrong. So we need to work with that and reframe that into the notion of a shared responsibility for making a situation better, rather than being culpable or being to blame for the situation having got bad. And if we can get people into that way of thinking, but sometimes we need to cast the net wider, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah. And sometimes there are organizations where two people have fallen out, and they make one of them will make a very obvious statement about how it's fallen out for the others in the room. There may be 7 people in a room, these two have fallen out, and one of them will build. There was a case, I think, that you sent me on not so long ago, where the person was building a sort of wall, so she wouldn't be able to see the other person, the other party that she was in dispute with. And part of the agreement at the end was that this wall would be taken down,
Yeah.
and maybe reposition their desks a little bit different, but not for it to be such an obvious thing. And so the message it gives out to the others. What's it going to be like on Monday morning? You're going to say hello to each other. You're going to say good morning to each other. You're going to say good night or thank you for today to everyone in the room on your way out.
Yeah.
That's the thing that other people see. That's the thing that they don't have to, and they don't have to ask how's the mediation. They'll see the effect. There's little tiny things that perhaps come under the radar for some people, but they'll be there.
Yeah.
And those are the important elements really to negotiate.
I think about sometimes, what's going to happen just at the end of the mediation, especially when the two parties go back into a larger open plan office and everybody in the room knows that these two guys have had a conflict. They know they're going for mediation, and then they come back in and people look up from their keyboards as though to try and read the faces, how did it go? How did you get on? For me, a lovely situation is, it's not happened all that many times. It'd be great if it happened more. But where those two individuals who are now more of a collaborative place, more of a place of understanding each other, come back in the room and go, quick huddle. Okay, you all know we've been to mediation. Here's what we want you to know about the outcome of mediation. And they've agreed in advance or agreed with the mediator what they're going to say in order to present back to the group and say, okay, here's how things are going to be between us, and just to let you know, this is over, and we'd appreciate your support to make sure it remains over.
Yes,
that's a lovely situation. It's ideal, I suppose, but
yes,
like I say, it's never quite that neat.
Yeah.
And just to come back into something that you mentioned earlier, I think we're alluding to it in a few different ways. There is this ambivalence with people coming into mediation. They have a tendency to want to settle and to resolve their dispute, but a tendency to want to perpetuate it. Part of them that actually is comfortable with the imperfect situation they're in. And it's so challenging sometimes to go into a conflict conversation without a mediator, but even with a mediator, it's such a tricky thing to do that people will resist it. They want things patched up because it's a thorn in their side, but actually it's such a challenging thing to do to address the conflict that they partly want to see it perpetuated.
And I think that what I bear in mind is that there's two people, but there are also two egos. So in fact, you're dealing with four things. And the ego's not in the kind of Freudian sense, ego, id, and whatever it is, superego. This is ego where someone feels slighted in a meeting, and they kind of say to themselves, "Does this person know who I am? I'm important. I've got some status here. How dare you, interrupt me? Or I see you're after my job," or whatever it is. That ego is always comparing, always judging, always trying to get the upper hand. And it's there in the background, and it's and also there's my ego, and I've got to be aware of that as well in the room. So in fact, there's all these forces going around, and the ambivalence element of it. When people are lawyered up and they say to me in pre-mediation, "Look, I've already got my lawyers on this. These people don't have a leg to stand on. I'm going to go for HR. I'm going to go for this organisation. I'm going to get as much money out of them." Then there's no ambivalence. They're clear. In fact, why bother going to mediation? We're just going to go. They're just going to be mudslinging. So I might just advise that we don't go forward because there's no goodwill. There's no goodwill at all. So people are not ambivalent in that sort of mindset. You're working with ambivalence, valence, that chemistry idea. There's valent things jump around, molecules jump, whatever they are, that they move and jump with another one to form another element. Apart from the inert gases, most things combine with something else. So there's valency, there's possibilities. Things either donate or they get another electron. So there's ambivalence. There's And that's what you can work with as a mediator. That's what you're trying to open up the possibility of. There's another story here.
Yeah.
The story you've created is partial. It's yours, and you only dwell on some of the details. You only going into some of it and creating your own rather, that's not so pleasant story.
That's at the heart of narrative mediation, of course. So the idea is it comes from narrative family therapy, which you probably know more about than I do. But the idea is narrative mediation. Two parties arrive with their own story about what's happened, which could be poles apart. And the principle within narrative mediation is that they, through the process, arrive either at a new shared narrative, or learn to an extent to tolerate the difference between their narratives. So it's about the story that people tell about their conflict and themselves, which will be influenced by ego, of course. But as you're talking about as well, George, when we're going for the more adversarial win-lose approach to conflict, which is still, disappointingly still so prevalent, and people lawyer up, as you put it, and come along, basically, it's who's got the biggest cannon up on the hill. Because we're ready for a battle, and my cannon's bigger than your cannon. So then we're kind of a bit late for mediation, as we know, when people have got that entrenched and that tooled up, ready for a fight. It's very hard to get in there. And the other thing that you mentioned when you talk about ego, in a sense, I suppose the antidote to that is about the vulnerability that we need to own if we're going to resolve conflict. It's part of the way that we set up mediation within our sort of model is to make it comfortable for people to express some vulnerability. Some vulnerability is about, I don't know what to do, or I'm feeling really hurt by this situation, or, help me out. These are all expressions of vulnerability, as opposed to expressions of superpower, which is the size of your cannon, the heft of your lawyer, and how prepared you are as you go into tribunal there with guns blazing. It's the very opposite of that.
Yeah.
Is in a sense what we're trying to help people to be able to own in mediation.
Yeah. And where's the growth points? Certainly not with, if you've got lawyers and cannons and so on, that you're not going to grow with that. You're going to be pretty much in the same place that you started off with, but you'll get the sense of, at least I've won this one, what's it cost you?
Yeah.
And so, can people grow? Can people give the uncertainty over to the other one to say, this is what's going on for me? I think I'm sensing that you're against me in some way. And the other person says, no, I'm not. I got the sense that you were against me.
Yeah.
And I had a mediation like that in an academic environment. It was professors or whatever they were. And they got up and hugged each other at the end. It's two women. They got up and hugged each other at the end of the thing.
Yeah.
And I just thought, good Lord. And that's can't do better than that, really. But
that's
just sort of incidental to that.
That's the projection writ large, isn't it? Well, I thought you thought this of me. Well, I thought you thought that of me. Exactly. And then we need this sort of the mediator as the lightning rod in the middle to try and to earth all of that charge, so that people can then start to see one another clearly. But coming back to the sort of varieties of mediation, George. So we talked about community mediation, and then we're talking about workplace. But of course, the model and the approach that we're sort of immersed in, and that you and I are talking about here, is applicable to lots of other different sorts of disputes as well. Complaint scenarios. So we've done quite a few cases around complaints and stuff like that, and what we call best interest scenarios as well, where in medical mediation, especially where there are decisions to be made and disagreements about withdrawal of care or about treatment that should be provided, and again, respecting confidentiality in a big way with this stuff, because it's quite sensitive. I think we've sent you out on a couple of those missions in the past as well, haven't we?
Yes. It was one was a big children's hospital, and it was a case of a Muslim father. And it was on a Friday, so I asked him, did he need to observe anything in terms of breaks for prayer and so on? He said, no, I'll just get on with it. His wife was away. His child was in hospital.
So the belief set comes in, the belief about leaving it in the hands of your God, whoever that might be, or allowing the medical intervention. And I think in general with these best interest cases that can often come into it, I think, around people's belief sets and people's, they're big things, these cases, because you're looking at, whether your belief system is something you lean back on to the extent that actually it might compromise the health or even life of your child. So, I'm amazed to say it's 33 minutes past. I'm just going to throw it open a little bit. We're just going to open for any comments or questions ideally to George rather than me. If you want to ask me something, you're welcome as well. So either pop your hands up or pop something in the chat box. Might be good to hear from you personally, actually. If I was saying earlier to put your cameras on if you can. Hi, Matthew, you got your hand up, Matthew. Let's hear from you, please. So we just better unmute you first. There you go. So Matthew.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Yeah, so I'm a new mediator. I only got my qualification recently because we did some training in February with my colleagues from Bradford Night Stop.
Oh yeah, we trained you. Yeah, hi.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, and I think it's going to be really beneficial for our service, because typically why young people become homeless and need us is because of family breakdowns and disputes. So I think it's going to be, something really helpful for us, and it's going to be a service that we want to implement. So yeah, but my question is for you, George. You mentioned that you were, I think you mentioned you were dealing with cases where, with squaddies who had like post-traumatic stress disorder, and we've talked about as well, like people having different beliefs and things. Like how do you approach things like that sensitively, where you don't want to like upset anybody or trigger anybody, but you also want to sort of resolve the conflict as well? I know that's not really our job, we're just facilitating a conversation, but yeah, how do you sort of approach cases like that sensitively?
Well, in my case, it was people that were living together in a hostel, so there was plenty of opportunity to fall out with one another over the smallest thing, even passing each other on the stairs. Some people expected people to sort of stand at the bottom of the stairs as they came down, and they considered it rude for the other person to pass them on the stairs. There were, fights about, I want to put something in the oven and your stuff's in the oven, and when's it coming out? Uses of the shared bathroom and so on. All of those things. It's like whack-a-mole. There's plenty of stuff that you're going around all the time, trying to find out what's actually going on, because some people will make a big drama out of it, because that's just how they do it at the moment. That's the step they're in, and they need a few villains in their lives, because they're out of their usual environment. Their wives or girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever it might be are not getting all their ire. It's going to be directed at someone else in the house, or someone that comes in, a friend or whatever it might be, a visitor, and so it'll be directed at that. So it's trying to get that person's awareness really of what is going on. So again, we'll use the mediation technique. We'll each meet with each party separately, and then see what the issues are, scratch our heads as facilitators or mediators, and then bring them together and see what's possible. What can be negotiated. And it might not work out the first time you do it. It might be that we have to say, well, let's do this again tomorrow, because we can see where you're het up about this at the moment, and you need to, you don't tell them, you need to vent, because they'll be doing that in front of you. But they're going through stages of talking to each other, and the initial stage, because they perhaps don't have the ability to do it in another way, is that they will make a big drama out of it in the room. And you're there to keep peace, really, and to make sure the conflict doesn't become larger. So it's using all those skills you've been taught and just applying that. And conflict coaching skills is another one. How do you ask questions of the other party so that they actually are able to say something to you, rather than you just insulting them all the time, or trying to prove you're right.
Yeah. Just come back on to come back on Matthew's question and to pick out that strand there. I think that's a really important question, is what's possible. And the work that you do, Matthew, and we know at your night stop and other night stops as well, that's tough work, you know. And sometimes with a family where there's a young person at risk of being made homeless, it's not possible that they're going to get back in the home. In some cases, it's not desirable for them that they get back in the home. And so we have to ask that question, what's possible to do? And in the settings where George is describing as well, where we've got to adapt the model, I think, because you're not doing it, it's not neat, is it, George? It's not like, right, we'll have an hour and a quarter with party A in the morning, an hour and a quarter with party B, joint session in the afternoon, tickety-boo, all sorted. And that's sort of the slightly caricatured version of what we do in workplaces. But with your work, Matthew, it's going to be repeated interventions with the family who won't necessarily want to sit down and talk to you for a protracted length of time. You know, the young person maybe doesn't favour that at all. It might be a brief intervention. Some of it might be done on text or on a WhatsApp group and all sorts. So it's about what's possible. It's about adapting the model to particular settings, whilst appreciating, you know, as George says, it comes out in all sorts of ways. The conflict will burst out no matter where you push it down. It'll burst out somewhere else. It's fascinating. It's fascinating how it works. Super. Thank you very much. Best of luck with your work. I'm aware that we did that training with. We've been training with Bradford Night Stop for a long time. So yeah, best of luck with those cases, quite tricky cases.
Best of luck.
Gerard, do you have something to say?
Hi guys, loving it so far. Question for both Mike and George. You've mentioned the different types of mediation and particularly what you guys do a lot of, which is the workplace and the best interests, which I love. I'm going to call it the touchy-feely bit of mediation. And my question is really, and that's probably, I don't know if that's the right thing the right way of putting it, but the emotions, the psychology, and all of the humanity, the feelings involved that each participant has in any dispute. You can see from the name behind me that I'm a civil and commercial mediator doing a lot of real estate, property related stuff. But of course, I mean, I do a lot more than that as well. But my background is as a real estate lawyer for 30 odd years. And I've only recently got into mediation. I'm thoroughly loving it. So my question is really, do you think, 'cause I'm sure you guys do commercial stuff as well. Do you agree with me that it's always the case, whatever label you put on the mediation, it's that what I call the touchy-feely stuff is always relevant because you're dealing with human beings. And whether it's, you know, a multi-million-pound property dispute or whether it's a neighbour, right of way, right of light issue, when you boil it down, it's all to do with our emotions, isn't it? So if I'm talking to a chief executive of some PLC trying to do a dispute with a tenant or a developer or something, and I'm sorry, I don't do many multi-million-pound cases. I don't want to paint the wrong impression. What I'm saying is at that level, there are the other stakeholders are shareholders, there's other people in the organization, and as well as the actual issue, they're concerned about their promotion or, you know, whatever. There are other things going on in their organizations which are driving their feelings. But boil it down, it's all to do with psychology and emotion and people, isn't it?
As our guest today, George, would you like to comment on that first?
Yep. You're primarily dealing with, Gerard, is evaluative mediation and
well, no, it's facilitative, George. Just stop you there. No, I don't do it. No, I'm facilitative. Yeah.
Okay. Brian Urie is the classic text on that.
Yeah.
And Harvard Law School stuff, and that stuff is it's important, obviously, to use those techniques of facilitation. That's what I was trained in. It's about negotiation. You know, I can offer you this. What can you offer me? That sort of thing. And you're trying to get to, I don't know, a middle point, possibly, a price or a settlement that is good for both parties. And sometimes that's done, you know, with the mediator running from one room to the next, you know, and they're all lawyered up in their own rooms, and you're the party in between, and you're trying to get a figure. You know, they won't accept 200,000. Well, what will they accept? 100,000. Or can we get to 150? Or can we get to 175? All of that. So that's part of your role, and you'll have also batting off their lawyers who are trying to get in on the act as well, and trying to, you know, put their, you know, make sure that they, you know, we're earning a big fee as lawyers, so we make sure that we're putting something into the mix as well. And you're trying to unmuddy the waters. Meanwhile, other parties are trying to, show that they are worth their fee. It's
do you think?
but it does.
Sorry, George. Just aware of our time slipping away.
Right.
I think what Gerard was also asking about was to do with the place of emotion, and the place of the sort of the interpersonality. Is that always there, even in the driest of commercial disputes?
Always.
I suppose just to dig a bit deeper there, Mike, it's the needs and interests, because we all start off, don't we, identifying the needs and interests. The needs and interests of the organizations might be contract-based, whatever, but within that, the needs and interests of the actual people who are in the room or on the screen, they have their own needs and interests as well. And it's trying to, I suppose what I'm really asking is it, do you think it's right to always drill down into the actual people themselves who are informing the organization? And they're trying to get they're trying to meet the needs and interests of their employer, effectively, their organization, or if they own it, themselves.
Yeah.
But doesn't it always boil down to the actual people themselves who are in the room?
I really think so, and I think it's the meeting of minds. I think sometimes even in the most hostile of environments, when there might be large amounts of money involved and people's livelihoods at stake, and the interests of what I would call constituents, Gerard, it's the people to whom you have to then go and sell the settlement that you've made. You've got to go back to sort of your body shareholders, other stakeholders, and say, actually, here's what we've settled on, and you need to be convinced so that you can sort of sell it back to them as well. But it's even in the driest of disputes, the most commercially orientated of disputes, it's about the moment in which the two parties catch one another's eye, metaphorically or actually, and have a moment of empathy. That's the time at which they can't start saying, okay, let's negotiate properly, rather than me trying to hurt you and you trying to hurt me. Let's get to a place where we put our heads together rather than banging them together and try and come up with some kind of settlement to this. So yes, I think it's always about the people, Gerard.
Thank you. And just finally on that, because when I'm knocking on doors of lawyers trying to get work, they see mediation slightly differently to us that do it. And I was talking to a barrister, comparing a young barrister doing a lot of cases, but in particularly family, and comparing notes. Well, tell me about mediation. Tell me about being a butler at the bar. And he said, when I'm talking to my client, in the example, he said it was a divorce case, it was a family case, money and children. And she was going on about her grief and her distress and what she wanted. And he said, I had to keep telling her, I only want to hear what the judge is interested in. I don't want to hear about the other stuff. And I said, that's where mediators come in. They want to hear about all this other stuff.
Exactly. It's having that balance of emotion and reason, and it's paying attention to the personal impact as well as the practical and financial impact as well. I would give them equal weight. Absolutely give them equal weight. Yeah. Thanks very much for that, Gerard. I'm just looking at my chat box here. And we have one from Bev who's saying about workplace mediations. Would you offer more if the issues are still ongoing after 6 weeks? Yes, is the short answer to that. So sometimes, Bev, I think when you solve, it's a bit like George was using the analogy of whack-a-mole. And sometimes when you solve the immediate presenting conflict between two parties, when they go away and start living their lives again, the work life or home life, whatever it's going to be, a different aspect of the conflict will surface. There's something else that didn't quite get resolved in the session, or they didn't even mention in the session. So there's nothing wrong with, usually through the referrer, we would tend to do it in a sort of three-cornered arrangement with our mediators, the referrer and the parties. Through the referrer, we'd say, is there any further support required? And if the parties are prepared to come to the table again, Bev, then yes, certainly we would offer some ongoing mediation. And I'm going to do one more, which is from Armin. I hope you got your name right. Thanks for the conversation. A judicial case. Okay, asking me about for judicial cases over the webinar. Okay, well, we do have something in the pipeline about that. Absolutely. So something going on there. And I think that's about it. I always try and keep to our 45 minutes, so I'm going to do it today. 47. So, George, turn to you first. Thank you very, very much for coming along today for our conversations with the mediator. It's been great. I could chat for hours. And we would just point our audience towards our social and our website. Check out what we do. There's a whole archive of free webinars on there. There's beginning to be an archive of conversations with mediators where you meet some more of our mediators. So for today, I would say, at least in Derbyshire, sun's coming out. So have a great weekend. Lovely to have everybody along today. Thank you especially to you, George, if you'd like to say goodbye.
thank you, Mike, and thank you everyone for participating and for listening. And good luck with all your mediations.
Fantastic. What a nice point to end on. Okay, thanks for attending. See you soon, everybody. Bye for now.